Okay, hello. Um, we're looking at the rise of civilization in China. We're going to pick up more or less where we left in the last class, right? In the last lecture, if you will, and following the readings of the text as I have spaced them out over a number of different chapters. Um, One of the things we saw is that around the year 2000, in a variety of areas, there is some sort of a climate shift that brings with it a degree of drought that will sort of undermine the advances of agricultural systems, specifically in the riverine civilizations, but really in a broader sense, the drying out of pasture lands for those groups that had specialized in the domestication of animals, created herds of animals that they would bring from place to place. They also get attacked at this particular point in time. In looking at China, we've seen a gradual growth of population as the spread of agriculture makes possible then a growth of population that will morph from villages into towns and create clusters of population along the two major riverine valleys, the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. River is slightly to the north, coming down from the mountains and then bending towards the sea. The Yangtze is somewhat further to the south, but also then will then bend and head in that direction. So there is this sort of area in between, not entirely a Mesopotamia as we had in with the Tigris and Euphrates, but certainly an area that is cross-fertilized with the growth of population in two areas. We've also seen that there was around the year 2000, from 2200 to about 2000, um, a sort of climate shift that has, because of the associated drought with it, has put a damper on the development of civilization in those riverine valleys that were really so, shall we say, determined by the yearly floods of the rivers, and the absence of flooding then sort of leads to if not a virtual collapse, certainly a decline in civilization. In the southern Mesopotamia associated with the Sumerians, you could say that it is really the endpoint of those particular areas, those cities that had already been challenged by sort of the movement of food to the north, food producing elements to the north. We've seen Sargon of Akkad come down, a Semitic speaking people, the Akkadians, come down, conquer the cities to the south, create the first empire, 2350, right? Egypt, on the other hand, which is so initially sort of like environmentally circumscribed in a fashion that it's not going to be attacked from the outside until eventually sort of people come either out of the Sinai Peninsula and attack southern um, or northern Egypt in the regions around um, the delta zones, or on the other hand, come in from the sea, what will be called the sea people. In any case, we're in Asia now, and something similar has happened in Asia. The difference, of course, is there has been agriculture there for a relatively significant period of time, but it has not brought with it the growth of institutionalized governance systems, as we have certainly most clearly in Egypt, but also in Mesopotamia. And what we seem to get is more densely packed localities, and then the population decreases to a certain degree under the onslaught of the drought. But it may well also have been that people are then drawn more to the river banks to try and take advantage of it. Once this period of relative crisis passes, there is a resurgence of agriculture and a certain return to this progressive growth and development of villages, towns, till you get to the point that uh, population has arrived at a point where the need for some sort of overarching governance, systems of governance to try and administer um, the uh, the use of the waters and the waterways so that everyone gets equal access to it, right? Um, Now, remember, the material infrastructure of this is based on the presence of two cultigens, millet in the higher, drier northern regions, and rice in the warmer, wetter southern regions, right? Create, if you will, almost like two separate civilizations there growing up at the same time. It will be in the area that relies primarily on millet that we see the rise of the first um, generally recognized sort of um, system of governance that is going to then lead into those dynasties that sort of one replaces another over time. Um, the Shang Dynasty appears more or less around the year 1600 BCE. It's going to last till 1045. It will fall to the Zhou Dynasty, a group that had been allies and almost had served as a buffer zone for the inner Shang region against sort of nomadic um, tribal groups to the north. In any case, it's going to arise during a period of cultural interaction um, uh, among agricultural communities along the Yellow and Yangtze River. As I mentioned, it's going to rise in a sort of a slightly northern, slightly western region, particularly around the city of Anyang at the very beginning, right? It is preceded by a period of sort of a mythological um, dynasty, the Shia dynasty. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Shia, something like that dynasty that has a date of around 2200 BC, and it is listed in the classical Chinese historians who outline the flow of civilization in China uh, and sort of have it as the foundational dynasty from which flows the later dynasty, as it were. Archaeologists who have gone in and tried to sort of, you know, find out if indeed there are any objective indicators of this particular earlier civilization have yet to come back with anything, right? Um, the writings about the Shia come later and hence suggest the possibility that this is a later construct in which we create a mythological figure, we being the historians of the time, create a mythological figure who establishes systems of governance that really reflect the people in power at that particular point in time. And so this may be a mythology designed to sustain and support a group of power and a system of government that existed when the myth was written to describe something that happened 1,000 years before, of which who knows what they actually knew and whether it was mostly invented. In any case, according to this myth, the end of the Shia dynasty will correspond to the long period of drought that we've mentioned, right? Um, and and so Tang, the first Shang ruler, um, overthrows a despotic Shia king, um, and actually, in the the semi mythological story we have of the founding father of the Shang dynasty, offers to sacrifice himself to end the drought. Somehow he survives, and then becomes the sort of wise old king who puts things together and develops, if you will, a system of governance and ruling that reflects the wisdom of the individual involved. Um, um, the system that comes out of him is sort of like seemingly one step up from tribalism, and it is a Shang political system that does not become highly politicized in and of itself. It doesn't have clear borders, doesn't have the same sense that we have, say, with Sargon of Akkad, the establishment of regions and governors, and sending troops out to patrol the area, things like that, right? Um, and at the same time, there seems to be a little need to build um, strongly defended permanent capitals. And so, if you look at the map in the book, it will show you the star that indicates the capital moves around to different areas. And what it appears to be is um, the capital will move as the empire expands and contracts over time, and chooses areas that are um, relatively easy to defend should they be attacked, and moves them closer to or away from border areas that um, reflect potential danger for them, right? Um, at the same time, the text indicates that there was a sense of, shall we say, security. There wasn't a sense of overwhelming threat to them. There were nomadic groups in the north that could potentially um, represent some sort of threat, but they tend to be more like raiders rather than organized political unities that could, organize large groups of warriors coming down a raid and things like that. And again, as we mentioned, the Zhou will later serve as defenders of the realm until ultimately they overthrow the Shang themselves in the year 1045, and again claim that the the ruler of the Shang had failed to follow the dictates of the ancestors, and hence had lost the mandate of heaven, which is sort of like which will become a major political. Um, how can we describe it? Um, we're we're what, 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks, something like that, yeah, from the presidential election. And President Trump asked publicly by reporters whether he would respect the election, and agree to a peaceful transfer of power, right? um, Said, "Well, I'm not sure. It depends upon what happens, right? And if the election is done right, there won't be a transfer of power because I'll just stay in as president, right?" And that idea of the peaceful transfer of power is a fundamental premise at the heart of the American democratic system. And for a president not to say, "Of course, I will respect the will of the people," is sort of has created a great deal of angst and concern inside the nation at large, right? What actually is going to happen? But that particular phrase, the peaceful transfer of power, is kind of like something like the mandate of heaven. It's a fundamental idea associated with the political system, right? And the legitimacy of the political system. The idea that, as Lincoln put it, government of the people, by the people, and for the people, right? Which is founded on the idea of the people voting, even though we don't have a democracy. We really have a republic, and We saw that with Hillary Clinton, who won the popular vote by 3 million votes. In any case, let's not get into that, right? Okay, so let's see, right? So they had no clear borders. They had little need for strong defended um, uh, permanent capital cities. Hence, the capital cities moved as the frontier expanded and contracted. You move move the capital city away from danger, but there was this level of relative security that the text suggests was visible in the fact that the king would sort of travel around the nation and visiting different other areas and stay with the local aristocrat, if you will, and go hunting and other kinds of things, right? And so it wasn't someone sitting inside a massive citadel, fortified, um, ready to resist any attack that came, but rather it was sort of a relatively free and open period of time um, for several hundred years. Uh, okay, so some of the things they did have is they did have a ruling lineage, right, where father and son son would succeed father when the father dies, then the son would step in to positions of power. There was an automatic passage of the ruling lineage and the crown. They also established written records, right, uh, of the lineages, but also of events occurring there and taxes and things like that. Now, what is the fundamental basis of the Shang power? Probably the one single thing that was most significant for them was metallurgy. Um, this is the Bronze Age. And bronze, which uses copper and tin. Apparently, the Chinese would also put some lead in it as well. But essentially, tin, copper was the first metal that was chosen because it was fairly malleable. You didn't have to melt it. You could bang it into things and create shapes with it. But of course, for things like swords and other kinds of things, it wasn't terribly viable because they would break, they would bend. Um, you swung at someone and missed and hit a tree. The next thing you know, you have your copper sword wrapped around the tree. And so copper never really emerged as a viable metal for other than decorative kinds of purposes. Uh, Once, however, they began to learn how to melt copper with tin, put them in the right proportion together with other things, sometimes with lead, sometimes with a little bit of charcoal, whatever it was that they would mix in. They would make then bronze, which is primarily copper, but with tin mixed in, it becomes a significantly harder um, metal, an alloy of two things, and it's also it's both in and of itself. It is physically a superior metal, particularly for purposes of warfare, right? Because bronze is a much more durable, hard, that maintains a blade much better, right? And so there's that. They also are going to bring in horses from the northern regions. They're going to also learn how to make um, chariots, as we've seen, the importance of chariots on the field of battle, and this combination of elements. And the bronze is going to be important for the chariots because if the chariot wheel is just wood, it can easily split and break. They learn to make them by putting rims of brass around them, right? Also covering the horses with brass protective, and so they were really able to develop a much higher level for military purposes to be able to go out and sort of chase the enemy across the fields, right? that's one thing, right? The bronze industry, and this is the Bronze Age, and the Shang are one of the premier representatives of the Bronze Age, not only for warfare and transport and things like that, but also because the emergence of an art form that uses bronze to create some rather extraordinary images, statues, and other kinds of things, right? That um, sort of become a manifestation of the wealth and power of the dynasty itself, right? And so you might say that they are a stand in for something like the pyramids. Pyramids are certainly much more awe inspiring, but the level of work and the degree of artistic control in these things is rather extraordinary. And the text gives you a picture of a drinking vessel in the form of some mythical bird that has elements of different things in it, but is really kind of an extraordinary piece of work. Well, they're going to, control the sources of the copper and tin, but also have their own sort of industrial foundries where they bring together artisans working on these things, right? And they will be treated as artists, as elite individuals, whereas the people working in the mines, right, are treated almost like slaves, right? In any case, their control over the bronze industries in all of its different facets gives them a sort of a leg up on any of the other groups around there who might want to compete for control and power with them. But there really hasn't developed any major sort of um, potential rivals. In the South, in the rice areas, there may be some stuff going on there that could possibly rival it, but it's really at that point in time, China is too big. That's too far away. Those are separate entities and worlds going on here, right? The second facet of the sort of controlling edge that the Shang have is precisely the introduction of a writing system that will evolve into the Chinese system, which is really very different from what we have, right? So classical Chinese um, develops um, characters, and each character reflects an idea. And it was built out of, sort of very early and primitive imagery where you could actually see what it was that they were drawing, right? But then there'll come a point where they will move to a higher level of coordinating different characters together to create a higher meaning. And so their way of indicating sunrise and sunset has a picture of a circle, um, uh, which is the sun, and then lines across it indicating whether it's coming up or coming down, and this kind of a thing. And then but what will be unique and unusual about the Chinese writing system is that since it is ideographic, it is designed to represent ideas. It is not designed, as our system is, to represent the sounds that together create words that then represent ideas. These symbols directly represent ideas. Hence, we will see that the Japanese will import, I believe under the Han Dynasty, if I'm not mistaken, but will import from China the Chinese writing system without speaking a word of Chinese. In other words, if it's an idea that I'm writing, if it's an idea that I am drawing, better than writing, drawing, if I'm drawing the symbol of an idea, what difference what differences make what language I speak? Um, it is, in some respects, a an interesting and fascinating way to approach the issue of writing, rather than sort of developing a vocabulary of words based on letters that reflect the sounds of the language. You go directly to the core concepts, and you somehow, but of course, over time you have to create um, an acceptance of the convention used in the signs so that I can write to other parts of the country. This will be issues at different points in time, as to the unification of the writing system. But at this point in time, we're going to have something rather unusual and unique, in the Shang Dynasty. Not totally unique. We there will be aspects of this elsewhere as well, right? But certainly in China, first thing you want to start with is the religion. We've seen in in Mesopotamia city states, each one of which is dedicated to an individual god, with altars that go back right to the very start of a city state and that get built up and grow massive over time, ending up in the form of ziggurats. We go to Egypt, there are a variety of gods up and down the Nile River that probably reflect the fact that the Nile was settled by varieties of people coming in from different areas that brought their religious beliefs with them. And when the thing was unified, there was an initial acceptance of these various, um, you know, deities, in different areas with their own temples and priests offering them sacrifice and this kind of a thing. And so there developed, a mythology of a community of gods with different powers and, and different ways of manifesting themselves, things like that. But that ultimately, from the point of view of society, what you had there was the rise of the pharaonic system of monarchs who were considered half gods, half men, who at death sort of, will, assuming that their life, fulfills, the dictates of their role as leader of society, they will rise up into the heavens, and sort of become, one of the sort of, star-like gods that are up there overlooking, events on this planet. We see that this is what drives the megalomania behind the creation of a pyramid, the largest structure, on the planet, for thousands of years, visible from space and all of this, as nothing more than a huge casket for this pharaoh, who, if he's God, should have, a burial and a burial site worthy of him. It will exhaust the civilization. It will lead to the downfall of the old dynasty, and those that follow it do have magnificent burials, but nothing on the scale of work that was required for the pyramids, which ultimately, as I say, exhaust their society. What we have here in China is kind of an extraordinary idea, that will influence Chinese civilization for the next, 3,500 years. Uh, Ancestor worship. Ancestor worship becomes a fundamental aspect of Chinese society, right? And while we have something like that with the pharaohs, it is kind of something that is reserved for that royal family, and the assumption is the son of the pharaoh, is the son of a son, of a god king and an earthly mother, um, who then has sort of divinity passed into him, right? And so the lineage of the pharaohs, is a sort of connection back to the foundation of the pharaonic monarchy and things like that. China will have some of that, but what makes a difference is ancestor worship is for everyone. It is the religion for everyone. And so every house can have a little shrine to the ancestors, right? So when the grandfather dies, then, you're then putting candles up and praying to him and this kind of a thing. And indeed, the ancestors watch over us, defend us, protect us, and indeed will punish us when we fail to follow the rules and dictates and things like that. But what makes it kind of interesting, and for me as an anthropologist, where I've seen societies that do something somewhat similar, right? Um, you can communicate with the ancestors. And the way they do it is with something called oracle bones. And oracle bones are, let me see. Damn. So it's the scapular. Do I have it here? I think I wrote it down here. Yeah, turtle shells and cattle scapula are used for this, and hence become items of tribute from outlying areas where they know that the king and his court require these elements to perform the divination ceremonies. And the text does a nice job of sort of describing what they do. They will take a scapula or a turtle shell, right? Take the turtle shell or a cattle scapula and place a red hot piece of metal on top of it, which will not, burn it so that it turns into fire, but will be hot enough to sort of force it to create cracks in the shell or the bone. Now, what we have then in China is the development of a group of people. I think I've mentioned in an earlier lecture the persona, the social persona of the shaman, and I suggested that the shaman is a really unique sort of individual. And there are cases and there are cases in the anthropological record. Some are more clearly shamans as we understand them. Some are, well, who knows? But the true shaman combines two elements together: the priest and the healer, and the sort of the deep-seated sort of collective consciousness behind this is that disease isn't caused by you know, bacteria and viruses and things like that. Disease are punishments sent down to us by the spiritual realm, our ancestors who are watching over us and see that we have um, disregarded the traditions, the rules of our group, something like that, and we get sick as a result. And in those societies, the shamans then can often go into a state of trance. And in this state of trance, they are able then to visit the spirit realm. It's interesting. In these societies, they sometimes use psychogenic kinds of mushrooms and drugs and leaves and things like that that they've created. Who the hell knows how they did it, right? How they came up with it. Who was the first person who got stoned and said, "Hey, wow, you got to try this," right? There's one group in the Amazon rainforest, and I studied anthropology with the gentleman Michael Horner, who went to visit the Hibaro. And the Hibaro take deadly nightshade, which is a plant that grows in the Amazon region, pluck leaves, dry them in the sun. When they're completely dried out, they pound them into a powder, and they will have these ceremonies where men, only men, women are not strong enough to take a spiritual journey like this, right? I can imagine what would happen to a feminist in that society, right? In any case, men will gather together, and what they will do is these are people who have blowguns that they use to kill monkeys and other animals up in the trees, and they will then prepare a portion of this stuff, stick it in the blowgun, go up to a person's nose, and I've actually seen movies of this, and it's kind of mind-boggling because you watch this person and bang, their eyes will roll back in their head. Suddenly, there's snot rolling out of their nose. They roll on the ground and this kind of thing. Now, in their belief system, they believe that under the influence of this drug, these individuals have an out of body experience. Indeed, there's another anthropologist who says that the origins of the idea of a soul that has a separate existence from the body, hence can exist beyond the death of the body itself, which is nothing more than a vehicle to carry the soul. They get their idea from that, from the experience of dreams. And in dreams, there you are, your body's asleep, you're not moving, this kind of thing, and suddenly you're floating around, and suddenly you're sitting there having a conversation with your dead grandfather and the neighbor who died recently and things like that. Um, in any case, uh, that anthropologist says that that is kind of what we could call to be the the objective correlative of the concept of immortality of the soul in the individual having an independent existence from the body, right? Similarly, in these people who get stoned like this and believe that they go on a quest with their spirit to the spirit realm, have ideas very, very similar, right? That the soul can leave the body under the influence of these drugs, and you go there and you commune with the spirits, kind of a thing, right? Um, this particular instance that we're looking at, that's going to become the ideology of a massive group of people, ancestor worship, right? Believes that after death, the soul of individuals exists, and is sort of floating around watching us, observing what we're doing, right? And can be aware of dangers that confront us and can possibly assist us or at least give us information about the future and things like that. This is the system then that comes into place in China, that will be very significant, right? And we see it in the form of what are called oracle bones. And these are these bones, as I suggested, the turtle shells or the scapula, up here in deer, I believe it was that they used, right? And they will use these to first burn them and read the cracks. So my wife's not around. My wife goes to bars and reads cigarettes. People stop smoking in bars here in New York, and so she's lost her trade. But for years, she used to go up and say, I can read your cigarette and I can tell you, about your past and future kinds of things. And so she'll take that cigarette that a person has been smoking with the ash in it and read the ashes. Um, I honestly think it's BS, but what am I going to say, right? And my wife gets free drinks. I can't complain, right? Uh, in any way, if you can find people, well, you're in the bar having a few drinks. Why not here? I'll buy you a drink, read my cigarette, tell me what's going to happen to me, right? But my wife is pretty shrewd in terms of reading those signals. Like they talk about the gypsy women who are able to sort of suggest something. You say, yeah. Yeah, I think it's a male. Oh no, it's a female. Yes, you're having problems with and this kind of a thing. And they sort of they make it appear as if they know this stuff, but they're really experts in drawing out from you, subconscious kinds of signals that you get in any case. In any case, here we have in China the growth of oracle bones as a system together with a group of specialists. Are they priests? Are they not priests? Well, they're you don't have a truly independent priestly class. You have a group of individuals who have this special ability, like shamans, if you will, to read the future as it's revealed in the answers that the ancestors give to the questions. And I think over time, then, as people began to question whether, indeed, was that, how do we know that you're not just making this up? So what they started doing was they started writing the questions on the bones so that you could see what the question was, and then they will read the answer and write the answer down on the bones itself. Um, uh, in the 20th century, actually early on in the 20th century, very, very close to the beginning of the 1900 and something like that, the first oracle bones were being discovered in a part of China close to where the Shang Dynasty was. Farmers in their fields would go into the fields and dig these things out of the soil as they're sending the plows through. And finally, one sharp individual said, I bet I could sell these as dragon teeth. China has all of this popular medicine with different things and stuff like that. So he took them in to a local, Chinese pharmacy where they sell toads and, all bats and bat drop, I don't know, all this kind of crazy stuff they have, right? And the guy started buying them, right? Well, some of them started coming in with writing on it, right? And he told the farmer, look, people coming in thinking that these are dragon teeth are going to say dragon teeth with writing on them. So they kind of, for a little while they stopped, and he would occasionally erase the writing off them to be able to sell them and this kind of a thing. But one day there was a guy around who was, a scholar of sorts, stopped in to the store where this guy was selling it, had heard about these dragon teeth, asked to see them, and he said, well, yeah, he said, I've got a couple here that he said, they've got this writing on them. He says, let me take a look at them. And he takes a look at them and he goes, oh my God, this is amazing. These are the earliest forms. So there they were, they discovered these. The key, the Rosetta Stone was in these things, right, that came back with writing on them, right? And so suddenly the whole question of this ancient Chinese civilization in this part of China, that they hadn't assumed that there was this major civilization, right? In any case, let's see if I can continue here. Now, this is the Shang Dynasty is going to build on the Longshan people we saw in the last section. Let me briefly review for you what they contributed. So the Longshan people had a metal industry based on copper. As we've seen, it's the movement from copper to bronze that ultimately separates the Shang Dynasty from earlier groups like the Longshan. But the Longshan already were practicing metallurgy. Secondly, they had pottery making, which we've seen is critical for storing grains like millet. They already had wall towns, and so there was a certain sense of the growth of wealth and the need for a certain degree of defense. And they already practiced divination. They had their own animal bones. Okay, so they already practiced a degree of divination. So all of this is available, but it isn't up to the level of the Shang. What will the Shang then add to it, right? Okay, so the first thing they will add to it is a lineage, father to son to grandson, a lineage of hereditary rulers, right? Whose legitimacy comes from the very fact that I am the legitimate son of the past ruler, hence I have received from him the right to rule, right? Um, okay, so a lineage of hereditary rulers whose power derived from relations to ancestors and gods, verified in the oracle bone traditions, things like that. Okay, that's the first thing, right? That lineage. The second thing is they are also going to use their writing to create written records. And of course, written records creates sort of like it's like our constitution. It is written. You can read it. It is there for everyone. It is a system of law external to the words coming out of the mouth of any individual. Rather, it reflects sort of the traditional way of doing things, right? Number three, they will develop a system of tribute, which is kind of like taxes, but the Chinese will sort of create a whole art form of tribute in which, rather than literally militarily subjugating other people, the threat leads others to recognize the sovereignty of this group and manifest it symbolically in the form of offerings that they make, the tribute that they carry on a yearly basis, right? Um, Finally, they develop a whole series of rituals, um, which enable them to communicate with the ancestors, as we've seen with the oracle bones. Where we go? And to foretell the future. Okay, so these elements come together, build on what the Longshan had given them, but the Longshan is separated from the Shang by that period of drought. Hence, they sort of raised civilization to the very doorstep, and then there's a collapse and a rebuild up, and the Shang move in, consolidate and add these elements to it, right? What the Shang are going to do is they're going to promote large scale metallurgy, where indeed they will control the sources of copper and tin, develop royal foundries where they bring together the artisans who work in this area and can develop swords and weapons for them, wheel covers for their chariots, right? They're also going to import horses from the northern regions where horses are being, because as you go further south, the horses apparently will not mate. They need to go further north to get renewal of their horses. They also, as we've seen other groups like in Egypt, like in Mesopotamia, um, they are overrun by groups that, nomadic groups, pastoralists, who have developed chariots together with horses, right? Overrun Egypt and Mesopotamia, but then the Egyptians themselves get together and develop their own ability to create chariots and, in fact, improve the chariots and become superior warriors. Same thing is going to be true here, where the Shang will import the horses, create chariots, right? And will enable them to expand into and defend themselves from those nomadic pastoral states to the north, states or not states, groups, tribal groups, right? Okay, but they will use these horses for both expansion and purposes of protection. The Shang Dynasty peaks around 1200 BCE, where we get the most copious collection of oracle bones in their palace, in their capital at that point in time, Yin, in the city of Yin. They build massive palaces, whole royal neighborhoods. They have huge bronze foundries to create, works of art that often have on them, um, you know, uh, pieces of writing, forms of dedication, right? Where the king would give as gifts to generals and things like that, that they would keep in the house as a work of art and a something honoring the memory of the family itself, right? Like families do when you receive a medal. from the hands of the president for having been brave in battle or something like that, and the family hangs it up so visitors come and see this kind of a thing, right? But again, that also is going to provide examples of the writing system developed at that particular time. Um, you know, okay, so we'll leave it at that, right? And remember, oracle bones are critical here, both in themselves and what they suggest in themselves, because they talk about the core concept of ancestor worship, but also more importantly for historians, they are the earliest example of the writing system that will evolve into um, Chinese character writing um, over the years, right? Okay, all right, we're going to leave it there, and we've certainly said enough about the Shang and their importance. They will be followed then by other dynasties that are going to consolidate what the Shang did, expand and develop into a variety of areas, but not without their own problems along the way. All right, thank you.